Last week, we reignited our list column with a very divisive topic: the best MMOs of 2013 so far. While quite a few folks didn't quite get that the list was a countdown of the games that are having a stellar year, as opposed to an end-all be-all list of the games that, are the best ever, it was still fun to see who agreed and who disagreed and what your guys' take on the whole thing was. And, of course, who flipped their lids and called for my head on a platter. Ah, opinions. They sure are fun. Well, hopefully this week's list strikes a similar chord. The selected titles will most likely be games that came out this year, but can include titles that came out in previous years if the game in question is having a particularly rough go of things since January 1st. With all that said, let's get to it. Here are MMORPG.com's picks for the worst MMOs of 2013 so far. If there's a game that's released in this year and it's also equally as terrible and it's not on this list, chances are it was omitted because it was so mediocre or so bad it just didn't warrant a mention. This top 5 is reserved for titles that hold a special place in the bad pile. Number 5. Wizardry Online. What went wrong here? Such a classic IP, such interesting ideas for an action MMO, but as our reviewer put it, when the opening credits for a game are more dramatic and compelling than the game itself, that's a problem. Aside from the buggy launch and questionable permadeath mechanic, it turns out that Wizardry just wasn't very fun when all was said and done. Let's hope that Dragon's Prophet, another promising free-to-play game being published here in the West by SOE, doesn't share a similar fate. Number 4. DK Online. You'll first look at DK Online and say, hey, this is kinda pretty. Maybe it's worth a try. Well, let us do you a favor and tell you no, it's not. As our review states, it's simply not worth a fuss. Everything in DK Online or Dragon Knights Online is generic fare, from the questing to the lore to the combat, and its only redeeming qualities in shapeshifting and castle sieges are underdeveloped to the point of being pointless as well. Avoid this one unless you're very, very, very bored. Number 3. Asura Force. Technically launched at the end of 2012 but reviewed this year by our staff, Asura Force makes the list because, well, it's just so damned blah. Consider this one a representative on the list for the same old thing MMOs that release on a regular basis into the wild. It's one in a long line of incredibly easy, generic, ugly, and copycat MMOs to be released since 2004 broke the market wide open. I'm doing you all a disservice by even mentioning it here, since there are probably a few of you that will check it out given your sense of curiosity. For that, I am sorry. Number 2. Scarlet Blade. Our review is still forthcoming on Scarlet Blade, but we're putting it on this list because, well, even if the game was a stunning achievement of MMO design and depth, we'd still find it shockingly and face-palmingly shallow in its audacious attempt at gaining players by appealing to the hentai lover in us all, if there is such a thing. For all I know, Scarlet Blade may be one of the best free MMOs to come out in recent years, but I'll never really find out because I'm too put off by the shamelessness of the whole package and the softcore anime porn it really is. Just look at the ridiculous ads that have been on this site since the game went into open beta. They're cringeworthy, and a whole game based on that sort of thing is plenty reason to make it to our number 2 spot. But it's not quite enough to make it to number 1. What is? Number 1. The War Z. What do I really need to say about the War Z that hasn't already been said by our reviewer, Blake Morse? Again, it technically launched back in December of 2012, but even this far into 2013, I think most people would be hard-pressed to call the game anything but a paid beta at this stage. Hell, it's probably more like a paid alpha. Blake put it best when he wrote, "The War Z is the gaming equivalent of a knockoff Spider-Man toy from Japan in a box that says Batman on it and has a picture of the Power Rangers." The War Z could have been amazing. Instead, we're left with a game that tarnishes the reputation of DayZ and a prime example of don't pay for something that you haven't played. That does it for our list this week. What games would you add to the worst MMOs of 2013 so far, and how come? Be sure to rant and rave in the comments and let us know. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch at MMORPG.com without the dot. You can also find me on Twitter at TheBillMurphy. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.